in this video I will talk about basically parts or units 2 and 3 of this whole basic audio live mixing training course. So I'll just guide you now through all the topics we will basically talk about in units 2 and 3. And I want to do it in a way like I will start at where the signal, like our voice when you sing into a microphone, the instrument which is played, where it starts at the very beginning, which is the microphone or the instrument. And I want to explain it to you. I want to explain to you where the signal, like this voice signal or the tone of the instrument, where it travels through until it ends up at the speaker. So we will start at the microphone and we will go all the way through and talk about everything which happens in between until we end up at the speaker. I call this signal chain. So for me, the voice or the sound of an instrument is a signal, and this signal passes many parts, which I call the signal chain, until it ends up at the speaker. So the purpose of this video is literally just to tell you what is there available, what do we have, and what things should we talk about, what is there you should know. And you should also get an understanding, like a basic understanding of what happens after each other, like in which row does the signal get processed, get changed until it ends at the speaker. So as mentioned already, we have a microphone. So there is various different types of microphone. We will talk about this in unit number 2, and we will talk about what types of microphone exists. There is also different directionalities we have to differentiate between, and we also have to know how do we use mics when we want to use them as a pickup for instruments. So how do we do drum miking, how do we use microphones for amps, let's say for electric guitars and so on. And of course there is also wireless systems, so we will also talk a little bit about what wireless systems exist and what you should pay attention to when you use wireless systems. Then on the other hand we have instruments, so there is a wide range of various different instruments. We'll talk how can we pick up instruments, and this is also strongly connected to DI boxes, so we will do one session about how do we use a DI box, why do we need DI boxes, and what's the difference between an active and a passive DI box. So that's the very beginning of the signal chain, where the signal is basically picked up, like our voice or the sound of the instrument, and it's basically at this point it is transformed into an electrical signal. So at the beginning it is like an acoustic signal, a sound in the air, which is then transformed into an electrical signal, so it can be sent electrically through this whole signal chain. So there is various different wires and cables used to send this electrical signal through the signal chain. So we have to also talk about these different wires existing. So there is shielded wires, there is symmetric, there is a difference between symmetric and asymmetric wires. We'll also talk about what a ground loop is. It occurs quite often, so it's also connected to how the wires are plugged. And we will also talk about different types of plugs and different types of sockets. Then the signal basically using these wires is transferred to a so-called stage box. So in the stage box, this is basically the point before it enters the mixing console. And there is again various different types of stage boxes. So we differentiate between digital mixing consoles and analog mixing consoles. So in digital mixing consoles, this is the point where the signal, the electrical signal, is also transferred from electrical to digital signal. So I'll also go into this a little bit later. Maybe important here, also there is some signals, especially one type of microphones, which needs additional power such that it works, such that the microphone runs. This is called phantom power, and this is basically also happening from the stage box. This phantom power is sent to the instrument or to the microphone from the stage box, and it's for most stage boxes it is indicated at the stage box by a little red light. Also at the stage box we do have the gain. This is the next part in the signal chain. So the gain is basically the location where we decide how what level or what amplitude the electrical signal should have. So that's basically the first thing which happens, and it even for digital mixing consoles it even happens before the signal is transformed to digital. So the first thing which happens is we have to raise or lower, like turn up or turn down this amplitude of the electrical signal, and this is what the gain does. So we have to get it into a good range we can work with later on. After the gain we do have a phase shift or a phase invert, and this phase invert basically helps us to avoid different sound waves cancelling each other out. So this is a way to get rid of sound waves which cancel each other out. We talked about this in an earlier video. So that's basically the first thing which happens after the gain. You can either use or not use this phase shift button. Then for many mixing consoles also have a user delay. So you can basically delay the signal which is coming into the console by a few milliseconds. I personally do use it often for multimedia. Often the video on the video signal is a little bit slower than the audio signal, so I normally use the user delay for the sound of the multimedia to slow it down such that it is arriving at the same point in time as the video at the audience. So that's the user delay. Then next we have high pass and low pass filters. So we now start to talk about frequency spectrums. So this graphic here, it shows on the y-axis the amplitude of a specific frequency, and on the x-axis it shows frequencies from 20 to 20,000. And what we can do with high pass and low pass filters is basically decide to cut the frequencies out up to a specific frequency for the high pass, or for the low pass to cut all frequencies above a specific frequency. So basically to turn down the volume of that specific frequency to 0. The next part, and this is not always the same for all of the mixing consoles, sometimes the order is a little bit different, but here the next thing which happens in the signal chain is compression. So what compression basically does is it lowers the range of the signal. So if in the signal there is very quiet parts or low parts, and there is parts with a high amplitude, what the compressor does is basically compress this range, or make this range of low amplitude signals and high amplitude signals smaller. Also, I forgot to mention the gate. The gate is doing something very similar. The gate is basically responsible to, when there is a signal with very low amplitude, the gate basically turns that signal even more down, or it switches it off completely. So this is especially useful for audio bleed when there is a microphone and some audio is coming in from another instrument at a very low level. You can cancel it out completely with the gate. That would be one use case for using a gate. Then next thing is equalizer, parametric equalizer to be specific. So the equalizer we use to again change frequencies in the whole frequency spectrum. So normally we have 4 frequencies we can pick, and we can decide for the 4 frequencies to either lower or to either raise or decrease the amplitude of that specific frequency. Next thing in the signal chain is insert. Signal chain is inserts. So with inserts we can basically do anything. We just basically lead the signal out of the chain, run it through some tools or whatever we want to do, and lead it back into the signal chain. So there is on the market there's lots of different tools available we can use, like additional compressors, effects. There is literally a ton of things you could buy to use as an insert, and this is then like just to do really fine adjustments, I'd say. And then next will be the mute button. So after the inserts, you have a button which is able to basically cut the signal, like stop the signal from going further in the signal chain. And this mute button you will use quite a lot, and I'm sure if you have seen a mixing console you also have seen the mute button. You will always use it whenever the instrument is not supposed, or the microphone is not supposed to send any sound to the speakers. You will push the mute button so the signal is stopped at this point. Then next is fader. So with the fader you decide how loud the final output level of your signal will be. So you change the amplitude of the processed signal, and this signal is then, like the faded signal, is then sent to the left-right processing. So the left-right processing basically collects all your microphones and all your instruments and does a final processing. So most mixing consoles again have an equalizer, a compressor and gates and everything again. So you could basically take the sum of all your instruments and microphones and again run them through a compressor or through an equalizer. And at the end of the left-right processing you also have a mute button and a master fader. So this is what you will probably use the most. Mostly you will use mute button and master fader in the left-right processing section. And that's the point where we then send the signal out of the mixing console into the speakers, and then the speakers will basically send the signal to the audience. So the speakers transform the signal back from an electrical signal to an acoustic signal, so the audience can really hear the sound. There's of course much more things we could consider. So at several points in this whole signal chain you can basically pick off the signal and send it to some other location in the mixing console. So I do not want to go into detail here. The only probably important thing to know at this point is that there is many ways to pick off the signal at certain points in the signal chain and do something else with it, like send it to an in-ear monitor or another speaker used for monitoring on stage, or probably you want to send the signal to some other room, or yeah, there is like plenty of applications for this. And you first always have to then define, like, where do I want to pick the signal in the signal chain and what do I want to do with it. So there is then basically again the whole signal chain we just discussed you can basically do again. So you can pick off the signal at some point and lead it into a different, we call it signal processing bus, and you can further change it and then send it to a different location. So we could go again through the same things like phase shift, compressor, equalizer. There is another tool called graphic equalizer. There is also inserts again, also mute buttons again, and of course also a fader again, and left-right processing again, until it's then again sent to some other speakers in the signal chain. Yes, so that's basically the whole signal chain. So try to remember just this upper part here, that's the more important part, and always keep in your brain that you can additionally also pick the signal somewhere in the signal chain and send it to some other signal processing bus. So all of these things I now quickly mentioned we will be talking about later in this course. I will go through all of these things so you get a good understanding of what it means to use these things and how to use them properly, such that you end up with a good sound mix. So see you in the next unit number 2.